Good afternoon, and welcome to another Exeter Institutogram conversation with me, Sajjad Rizvi, from the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. Today, I will be in conversation with Aparna Vaidik, who is a historian at Ashoka University, and we'll be talking about her new book, which is... Hi, Aparna.
Hi.
You're on your side.
Oh, so I should put the phone on like
Yeah,
this?
that's better. Yeah, thanks. Yeah,
Oh,
great. Thank
okay.
you. Cool. Good to see you.
I'll have to hold it
Okay, right.
because the thing it rests on,
Yeah.
my cards are at the bottom.
Okay. Sure. Well, welcome to this conversation. I just briefly mentioned who you were, and I was about to say that we will be discussing your new book, which is called My Son's Inheritance, A Secret History of Lynching and Blood Justice in India, which of course is very timely, as I'm sure
Yeah.
many people are aware. Um, to I guess to start this off, um, maybe I can ask you to say a bit about yourself. You know, your background as a historian, and then how it was that you came to write this particular book.
Um, I didn't set out to write this book.
Right.
I had done some op-eds on lynchings in India, and the editor from LF, Anla Ozukam,
Hmm.
she approached me to write a book on lynching.
Right.
And I was like, how boring, like, what a thing to write about.
Yeah.
So, but the idea grew on me. I'd already done stuff on it, but I was like, how do you say all this over 20,000, 40,000, 60,000 words?
Right. Yeah.
So, but the ideas in the book had been with me for nearly 2 decades. I had actually, my first PhD proposal that I'd submitted to JNU was on this,
Right.
was on the fable that my grandfather used to tell me. But I don't think I had the sort of the emotional or the intellectual wherewithal at that time.
Hmm.
So I think I just took it from there. I just took this as an opportunity to say what I had been wanting to say for a long time. And for me, although it's the present that feeds into the writing of this book, but I feel this phenomenon, and that this phenomenon has been around for a very long time.
Right. Okay.
So, and that's how the ideas were with me. And also my current work is on histories of violence.
Right.
So I was already engaging with the ideas of violence. So I think it just came together at a certain point in my life, the idea of doing the books, and yeah, so that's how I
Okay.
came to write it.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's interesting because this is, I mean, I guess we will talk more about this, but it's like the intervention of a historian
Yes.
in I guess, a public debate,
Yeah.
an issue which many people have, a stake in and have an interest in. Um, if I could just say something about how I see the different elements of the book coming together, and then you can kind of perhaps comment on that. Um, as I see it, there's sort of three things going on in this book. I'm not talking about the content, but I'm talking in a sense about the form or the structure. One is, this history of violence, a particular kind of violence associated with lynching, which, as I think you put it quite interestingly, critiques this idea that there is something essential about Indian civilization and its attachment to non-violence, which comes out of this sort of myth of the Gandhian,
Yeah.
narrative of the origins of the nation.
Yeah.
And another element is this kind of the set of your stories from your own family, so the family history element of it, and how that family history becomes part of this wider kind of national or civilizational history. And the third element is, as you put it, it's for your son, right? So almost like a sort of a long letter, so to speak, which is how you frame it at the beginning and, of course, at the end of it. So it strikes me that the coming together of these three elements is central to it, and quite an interesting way of posing it. And I can see it fitting in with some other interventions recently in history where the personal is very much part of the story. So I'm thinking of people who've been writing on genocide. One recent work on Palestine, which does something very similar. So it seems to be linked to that sort of phenomenon as well. So perhaps you could comment a bit on these sorts of elements of how it is that you're presenting this work.
Yeah, the sun here is really a metaphor.
Yes, I mean,
yeah,
and
yeah. So
inheritance as well, in a sense, is a metaphor as well, right?
Yeah,
so.
Yes. It's all. So I use and I like the double meaning there.
Yeah.
Because it is the sun, but is also really a metaphor. And so I'll tell you how this happened, like the process of writing.
Okay.
So I think there were two things in front of me. Was how do you talk about this? How do you bring your research to public?
Yeah.
Because we can't talk in jargon, we can't talk the way we talk to other scholars, and I'm assuming an informed, intelligent lay reader.
Yeah.
But they don't talk our language. So how do you speak? How do you narrate? And I think the other thing was vantage point. Now, the historian is an omniscient narrator.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a sort of a false notion of objectivity that we adhere to while writing our text. Although I feel that all writing stems from a certain kind of a moral position, it stems from a certain political stance and all of that. But somehow in historical writing, all of us assume to be neutral and objective in a way that, which we aren't. So, but when you're writing for public, then you really do have to have, I was like, okay, how am I crafting this narrative? What is my vantage point? How am I looking at this entire thing?
Right.
And I thrashed around for a bit. It took me a few months. Earlier, I thought if I'm going to do a book on lynching, then what I should do ideally is to go about interviewing, do an ethnography of the Muslim butcher community of the Qurayshis.
Right.
And then the question was, how do I get access to that world?
Yeah.
Why would they speak to me? And all of that.
Yeah, there'd be suspicion and concern about why you're doing it. And exactly, yeah.
Absolutely. And then I would need a Muslim interlocutor friend who would, a Dubhash, who would translate it for me, who would be a trusted person that some Qurayshi man can, can trust. And, so it had all those layers. And I was like, okay, then I fall into the trap of representation. And here again, and also appropriation.
Of course, yes.
So how do I go about writing this when I'm being honest to myself and not indulging in all those intellectual gymnastics? Okay. And then I was like, okay, wait a minute, what is my vantage point? And my vantage point is upper caste, upper class, Hindu woman,
right,
from whose community the lynchers come.
Right, yeah.
So that's a great vantage point, right? Who writes from that vantage point? So I was like, okay, here is my vantage point, and let me just stick with that.
Okay.
Let's view the world as it comes from that vantage point and see what we arrive at. So that's how so that's the second thing, that's the second journey that I began to make. And the third was then how to tell the story.
Right.
So I was dealing with a very clever, intelligent editor who gave me Ta-Nehisi quotes, Between the World and Me to read, as a way of thinking about the, body and all of that. And I think that book is wonderful. If people haven't read it, they should read it. Okay. So that book's great, and it had a huge impact on me. But it also connected me to stuff that I'd read earlier, but not thought about, that's the way I could write. And that's, you have James Baldwin's, the essay that he writes to his nephew. And Nadine Godimer's My Son's Story.
Yeah.
And I used Du Bois in the last chapter.
Yes.
And Du Bois in his Souls of Black Force also writes to his dead son. And having become a parent, storytelling is something I was doing all the time.
Of course, yeah.
Either in the form of persuasion or in the form of lies that I tell them all the time, about this and that.
Not necessarily stories such as this.
Yeah. So I felt that narration strategy I was being true to myself.
Hmm.
You know, and also the sons embody, one is the metaphor, but my own sons are part of a mixed marriage.
Right.
So I thought there was a story there, and also these stories come with a lot of silences.
Cool.
And that's why the secret history.
Right.
You know, the story of my family is also a story that is secret, that is silent, that is not talked about.
Hmm.
And then it made me wonder, when once these boys are teenagers, what is the kind of literature do they read?
Yeah.
Are they going to grow up as Savarna upper class men, or there's going to be something more to them?
Right.
So I was like, somebody needs to tell them about those silences. Somebody needs to get that conversation going, at least in writing. You know, so yeah, so those are the things that, and that's why the narrative strategy, the way it is.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I wanted to take us further into these wider sort of questions about, you know, the writing of history, what history is, and why this particular moment. But if I could ask you to say something about what you actually argue in the book. I mean, what are you trying to say in the book? What is the basic, I guess, quick summary of what you set forward?
Well, violence is there. It's very much an essential aspect of Indian society, and non-violence is not what defines us. So I feel that book is a critique of the liberal view of India.
Right.
Most people, like, you know, as I was telling you earlier, that most of my friends buy the book and they don't read it because they think they know the argument.
Okay.
But the argument is critiquing the positions that we hold, actually.
Right.
You know, the educated people, the sort of the Khan market gang, it's people like us. It's the opinions that we hold about India, the opinions we hold about ourselves is what the book critiques.
Right.
So not only is it a right wing, it's a critique of the right wing, but it's a critique of the right wing and the liberal positions that we hold.
Right.
That fundamentally sees a division between religion and politics, that wants to sanitize politics from religion and sees religion as the bane of everything and whatever, you know, all of that. So it critiques those views. It says violence is an essential element of your inheritance. And it has always been there, but it's been invisibilized.
Right.
So let me tell you how it is there, but it is invisible.
Okay.
Because once it becomes invisible, it may prevent you from inflicting it on other people.
Okay.
So it's a hope.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, and part of the story is, I mean, what I found quite interesting in this is the way in which you have different kinds of histories which are invoked. So, you know, in opposition to this kind of liberal notion of the secular, almost non-violent past, you're invoking another one in which there's kind of a caste or a class struggle going on, in which violence is very much part of it.
Good, I dropped my phone.
It's okay.
Okay.
You managed to get it just in time. So, you know, you talk about Jyotiba Phule, and you talk about, you know, other kinds of ways in which histories of, I guess what you know, traditionally we would have described as subaltern histories, in which violence is never, in many ways, absent. So you use those sorts of accounts and bring them forward, and I think perhaps it's especially that sort of genealogy of violence, which may well be unfamiliar to a lot of people.
Yeah, you know, I feel that when we are talking about communalism or we're talking about Hindu-Muslim stuff going on, often a point that is missed is caste within Islam.
Yeah.
And most of the academics, most of the friends that people have are upper caste Muslims.
Yes.
Or upper class Muslims.
Yes.
And you should see, I mean, you would be privy to these conversations. The way they would talk about a Pathan, or the way they would talk about Qureshi, the girls are warned never to bring home a Qureshi man and all that.
Right.
So I feel that even the religion question has an element of caste in it.
Sure.
That is never ever talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here I'm conflating the two a little bit, and I'm waiting to be called out for that.
Right.
But so far I haven't been, and I'm getting away with murder over here because I know I'm doing that in the book. I'm moving from talking about the Muslim butcher into, I take people towards Phule, and that's a sleight of hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but that is to help people see that these two questions are important, and these are the two questions that are the questions of India.
Yeah.
You know, the question of India is not the question of nationalism, it's the question of caste and the question of religion. So
And I
yeah,
think it also kind of brings into play the various ways in which different types of privilege work. So,
absolutely,
I mean, certainly for, you know, a lot of people that I know in India who are Muslim, they are very privileged. When
absolutely,
it comes down to it, you know, they could easily be targeted, but they're not going to be targeted in a random kind of way on the street because they happen to be in a particular place at a particular time. But I think it would
yeah,
be, you know, so and of course we know the way in which you know, different kind of nationalist groups deal with different types of Muslim elites as well. So it's not equal.
yeah,
You know, certain types
absolutely
of
not.
Muslims are courted and certain types are not, and so forth. So, you know,
Yeah,
you have these photo ops with like peers and you know certain types of
absolutely.
ulama. You know, these are not the sort of people who are going to be targeted in the same way as the average
Yeah.
person might be, who, you know, looks stereotypically Muslim.
Yeah, and also, you know, it's who represents the Muslims also,
Yes.
who gets to have a voice within the community. It is either the ulama, the mullahs, or certain kinds of intellectuals,
Yeah.
and more often than not, male.
Yes.
So so it's who gets to have the voice, who gets to represent, and I'm like, okay, I don't get to represent. I
Yeah.
can't even begin to represent. So let me not do that.
Yeah.
Let me just tell the story from the vantage point that I do have.
Yeah.
And there is a story there as well.
Sure.
Because who we never unpack, most people sort of dismiss the right wingers as lunatics, loonies, crazies, people who are immoral, people who don't have this thing. But I'm just trying to complicate that image.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with Chimamanda Adichie's Purple Hibiscus.
I'm familiar with it, but I
No, no,
haven't read
okay.
that book. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and never mind. But in that, there's basically a story of a father,
Hmm.
and the father is a very loving, devoted man. He's very kind-hearted, does a lot of social good, and all that. But he's also tyrannical.
Yeah.
So how the same personality can have those shades?
Yeah.
How the picture is more complex?
Hmm.
And I don't think like it's a very flat, easy, simple view that people take of people who have certain kinds of ideologies.
Yeah.
Actually, the picture is more complex. So here I'm, through the story of my grandfather, I'm actually sort of trying to complicate that for people, that it's not easy. These are not bad people, they're not immoral people, but there's something going on there, and let's look at what's going on.
Yeah. And
Their ideology is insidious, what the ideas they hold are hurting people,
hmm.
but let's try and get it, so it's that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course you have that kind of whole tradition from people like Arendt, etc., about how, you know, a lot of what we think is horrific is actually very straightforward and ordinary. And if you have a
Exactly.
particular context which you might find yourself, you know, who are you to say what you might or might not do?
Yeah.
But certainly
Yeah.
beyond that, I mean, I think that the important point is that dismissing actions or individuals as being insane or mad fundamentally is
Yeah.
avoiding the question. Because once you
Exactly.
dismiss something as lunacy or madness, you're not engaging in trying to make sense of what's going on,
Yeah.
and you know, you can't really account for the action of a madman, whereas you can
Yeah.
account for an action which arises out of certain types of calculations, right? So
Yeah.
you can address
Yeah.
those calculations and the perceptions and the thought which goes into it, but you can't address
Yeah.
madness.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you
So,
know,
like my grandfather would come out in the aid of a Muslim neighbor, pay for the repair of his workshop, pay for his materials, take care of him and everything, but at the same time write anti-Muslim pamphlets.
yeah,
So
correct.
how do you understand that contradiction? So I think that's the thing that I'm trying to explain in the book, that it's not that easy. These easy compartmentalizations that sort of public discourse makes available, that's not the way humans work.
And it also raises this
So
whole question of how we see the other, right? So it's much
exactly.
easier to kind of see the other as part of this wider community or belonging, which can be characterized in a particular way. But when you have kind of
Yeah.
face-to-face, you know, intersubjective, as they call it, dealings, then that's a very different kind of thing.
Yeah.
And of course, there's so
Absolutely.
many examples of this in lots of contexts, not just in South Asia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that's very
Yeah.
much part of it. Um,
Yeah.
I wonder if you could say a bit more about the word lynching. I mean, I know perhaps it seems fairly obvious,
Yeah.
and by invoking the African American kind of context as well, you're making that link. But is lynching the appropriate term? Um,
Um,
yeah, if you could say something about lynching.
you know, so there is no equivalent word
Hmm.
in any of the Indian languages.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you can find is a semantic translation.
Yeah.
Like, in the sense, the meaning one can look for, but I'm arguing that the meaning is hidden.
Yeah.
So a dictionary is not going to unveil a word that is equivalent
Yeah.
to lynching for you.
So
Yeah.
what
So
word would they use in Hindi?
everyone's going to kill me for it, but I'm going to say it. Dharma Yudh,
Right.
the
Which
righteous
is
war.
it takes on a whole set of
It's a righteous war.
exactly. It's like jihad.
Okay.
So it's like the use of jihad or jihadis, right?
You said it, I didn't.
Yeah.
You said it.
But
Okay.
that's of course deeply problematic. I mean, certainly when you look at
Exactly.
what lynching is,
Exactly.
because I don't think, I mean, not that I think that people in the deep south in the US would describe lynching as a positive thing, but it didn't have that connotation, did it? Of
No. I'm not saying it's
yeah,
positive. I'm saying that when we are in the South Asian context, when we're trying to understand the word,
yeah,
the word will not appear in a dictionary
yeah,
because the word is hidden. So where do I go looking for it?
hmm,
It's hidden in your midst. And in the midst, the word actually is a positive term called
yeah,
Dharma Yudh,
of course,
because Dharma Yudh is something you wage in order to maintain the order of things.
yeah, yeah,
So it's actually a positive word.
right,
Yeah, but in that positive is the idea of non-violence or the righteous violence.
right,
And that righteous violence, the axe or the sword of that is falling on the Muslim butcher or the Dalit man.
right. So
So
it's
it's all, yeah, it's all very nice to have the righteous violence, but let's just examine for a minute. Let's pause
yeah,
and see who's getting killed. It's the Mahishasura who's getting killed. It's the Shambhuk who's getting killed.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So how righteous is your war? Is what I'm.
I mean, certainly,
Yeah.
as I said, it's yes, this idea that the norm is peace or non-violence, and this is something that you're somehow being compelled to do.
Yeah. It's because you have to maintain the order of things.
Yeah,
The order of things is being violated by this other,
yeah,
and then either you eliminate the other or make the other subservient to maintain the order of things. So it's like Foucauldian also, na? Like
yeah,
what Foucault will also say, the order of things is very important.
yes.
So we can even connect it to modern governmentality. Like,
And yeah, and it's the
all
way
these threads there.
it's the way the modern state is supposed to work.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
perhaps the interesting thing is my assumption is that these acts are carried out by people who are non-state individuals, right?
As we would describe them.
Yeah,
Because the state is not required, na?
yeah. So this is the thing. You know, what brings us to a situation in which citizens think that they have a right to carry out, in a sense, the function of the state. So if the function of the state is to preserve the public order, right? How do you get in a situation in which citizens think that they're the ones who should be doing it? I mean,
Because
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, that's, again, I think that what comes in at that moment is technology.
Right.
There's a way you mobilize the people into believing that. And we have had that happen in India at different times. So I begin with talking about print culture.
Right.
In the late 19th and early 20th century. Then in the 1980s, you have the TV, you have the VCR, you have the Ramayana and Mahabharata.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they directly lead to that, but there is a way of, sanitizing that and presenting it to people. This is your culture, righteous wars, righteous killings, and all of that. And now it's come back actually on TV now in the time of pandemic. And then you have, in our time, you have the WhatsApp, you have the internet.
Right. Yeah.
So I think technology has played a very important role in the way we sort of, you know,
Someone
yeah.
has just commented that maybe they don't think of themselves as citizens to begin with. Uh,
Yeah.
but by the way, if anyone has any comments and questions, please do send. You can write them down, and we'll try and pick them up as we go along. So I guess if they don't consider them to be citizens, themselves to be citizens, what do they consider themselves to be? Sort of an arm of the state, or I don't know.
I don't know. They're the keepers. They're the keepers of
Yeah.
the order.
Yeah.
They're the
Yeah.
keepers. They're society's keeper. And earlier patriarchy did that for us. Like the women, the way they police each other in homes, who are the keepers there? The women. The men have given them the job of keeping.
Right.
So here, if they're not thinking of themselves as citizens, they've been given the job of keeping the order.
Right.
They've
Yeah.
become, they're believing that. So, yeah.
If I mean, we could of course extend that, and we might come back to this. But if I come back to the the big question which you've raised, which is precisely how we do history, right? So, what is the
Yeah.
conception of history which is being presented? And if this is an intervention to try and take that sort of debate to the wider public, right? Because of course, historians always kind of agonize about what history is, right? And we always have this issue of how we present it to our students. What is history, and how can they understand the craft or what sort of practice it is. What do you think you're trying to say in this book with respect to that sort of question? What is history? How should those who read it really engage with that sort of question?
A lot of my writing, this book actually has come with years of teaching.
Yeah.
And as you may have also encountered, as one grows a little older, one's anecdotes start resonating less and less in the classroom.
Of course, because they're suddenly like much younger than your first book or something stupid like
exactly.
that.
Exactly. So that's one. It's the thing of one's own aging. But I think in India, the post-91 generation, the people who were born after the economy opened up, who didn't experience the so-called socialist India or the pre-liberal India, they are disconnected from the past in a way that we weren't.
Right.
We had stories that we were being told. There were these conversations. So this is a very different generation. And when you encounter them in the classroom, there's a great, like they would know about Kim Kardashian's latest, adventure or whatever, or Justin Bieber, but there is a surprisingly lack of understanding about their own country, their past, immediate past. And that allows actually that's great fodder for the right wing. Right. You can basically plug in any propaganda as knowledge. And that's what's happened to a lot of young people, I feel. They come in filled with all these ideas, and I'm like, where are you getting this from?
Right.
No, that's not the way it happened. And then you become this kind of, as if you're this thing correcting everything. No, this is wrong, this is right. I was like, okay, how do we make history available to them?
Right.
In a way that they can understand and digest. Yeah. So I think this writing is a lot about that. It's about making research accessible. And I would go as far as to say this is public history.
Yeah.
How do we practice public history?
Right.
How do we write to and for the public? Because we're not trained to do that. We're trained to talk to each other. We are trained to talk in jargon, get your English right, get this right, get that right, get your footnotes right. Yeah. Don't if you're a historian, I'm not allowed to leapfrog in time, and all that. Okay, fine, I've mastered that, but then what? You write a book that 200 people barely read. You don't make an impact on the public discourse at all. And who hijacks the public discourse? It's all the loonies out there.
But then you've got the kind of the next stage of how it is that you then disseminate that, because of course you publish a book which is for public readership, and you hopefully sell well, and you told me you're selling well, which is good. But that's
don't tell this to I haven't yet got my royalty sheet.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah, so
yeah,
you should get the royalties soon. And
yeah,
you'll certainly get more out of this than you would get from an academic monograph, that's for sure.
yeah,
Um, but then, of course, there's still the further stage. I mean, there's word of mouth, of course, you can tell people about it. But I mean, do you think you should be doing other kinds of disseminating events? I mean, obviously, this is a sort of dissemination, but it's a very selective
yeah.
dissemination because not everyone is on Instagram or pays attention or has time for this. But um, have you thought about other ways in which you might try to disseminate this book?
That's what editors and agents are for, no?
Right. Okay. That's
You know, I can write,
yeah.
and I wasn't going to make any money anyways. They are the ones who stand to gain money and
Yeah.
earn it. So, so I go. I've gone, which is a very unusual for me and for academics. I've actually gone to lit fests.
Yeah. Right.
Things that I would scorn at,
Yeah.
completely condescend at. Six
Yeah.
months back, I've actually deigned to go to them, and
Well, they're very useful, and they pay the bills at the very least. So
well, they get you nice. It's a nice jaunt. I'm yet to figure out what bills they pay, but I think it gives an opportunity for a conversation,
yeah.
and it's not a very serious conversation, but yet, I hope it dents something somewhere. And then I tell myself, I always have the classroom.
Yeah.
So, and you always have PhD students. Sorry, go on.
I was actually going to say, yeah, so someone's actually just mentioned this. Well, they've talked about the lack of the English titles into vernacular language is one of the reasons for the limited impact. So, yes, of course. So this book is written in English, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
so, it's going to be translated in Malayalam.
okay.
And somebody's like, so they've reached out for translations.
Okay, that's good.
So that's definitely on, because I feel that, I personally also feel that
Yeah.
this book needs to be translated. People need to talk about it, read it,
Yeah.
get angry with it.
Sure.
Because if they're angry, that means something's got shaken up.
Yeah. Because I would have thought that
yeah.
once you have it into Indian languages, I mean, not that English is not an Indian language, but certainly
Yeah.
you have the potential to reach a wider kind of audience, which would be quite interesting.
Yeah. I'm waiting. Like, my husband keeps pushing me. He says,
Yeah.
get it translated to Hindi. Get it translated to Hindi.
Someone's,
like, you
someone's
don't like
just
my happiness.
someone's just commented Telugu.
Telugu. Yeah, sorry, Telugu. That's the editor.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So I mean, certainly that I suspect that would be interesting, and it also raises the question that we often have. I mean, perhaps not so much me, because I still very much am in a British university, but a lot of colleagues who do work in, say, South Asian universities only ever publish in English. And one has a sense that there's a disconnection with your immediate environment, which surely, if you try to use local languages, would have a greater impact.
Yeah,
if you want
absolutely.
to reach that public. Yeah.
Absolutely. You see, it's not just that. Say you're offering a course on cinema.
Yeah.
What do you teach in that?
Yeah.
You will teach all the high cinema.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I offer this course called History Novel Cinema.
Right.
And I shamelessly assign Bollywood.
Right.
The most popular Bollywood stuff in it, along with cinema noir and some good stuff.
Yeah.
But, I mean, not that Bollywood is not good stuff, but, there is a sort of inherent elitism also.
Of course.
Yeah. Which goes beyond just simply use of certain kinds of language. And it's not even language, it's a kind of register, the vocabulary that we use.
Right.
So, and I think, like, most of our colleagues would be loath to be on social media. They'll be like, Instagram, really? You're nuts. You should get off it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the world's changing. I mean, like, a quick anecdote. I think 2-3 years ago, I took part in this sort of event we did for our grad students, in which we were trying to encourage them to how they get their research out. And one of the people there actually said that every kind of engaged academic should, at the minimum, have at least 10 to 20,000 followers on Twitter. And I was like thinking that requires a bit of effort, right?
It
and
does.
Obviously, there's some colleagues of ours who are celebrities, and if they were on Twitter, they would probably immediately have lots of followers without even doing anything. But for
Yeah.
most of us, you know, I think it actually is a very useful way of getting stuff out. I mean, I've been using Twitter a lot more recently, Instagram less so, actually, personally. But I actually find that that brings in people you would not normally talk to.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's not just kind of potential students or fellow academics,
Yeah.
but sometimes
Yeah.
it's people who have an interest in something that you're doing, but are not
Exactly.
engaged with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, someone is saying that you should join.
Yeah, I read
Yeah.
that. So actually, I got coached by a student how to use Insta Live. So
Right,
I was like, okay, how do you post a story? So I have good coaches
right,
coaching me through Instagram. Yeah, but I need a coach for Twitter now.
right. I mean,
But
Twitter,
yeah, you know, just it's just for me writing this book and going with the flow of marketing the book has required me to get out of that mold of an academic.
yeah, yeah,
And I realized how conservative we are, how close-minded we are, how elite we are.
yeah, yeah.
That just talking to other people, talking to people who are not like us is like, you know, I was amazed at myself. I was like, okay, this is what you guys really are.
But you know, it's also,
Conservative, narrow-minded.
and it forces you to, like, for example, give up on the footnote, because you can't have footnotes in Twitter. So, you know, and I struggle. I mean, what I often do is I do these kind of long, like ridiculously long threads on a topic, right? But you can't nuance things. You have to be right at the point, and you've got to find visuals. So, you know, if you just have a thread just with text all the way through, it's quite dull. So you need to find pictures, you need to find videos, and other ways.
And you know, I would say, Sajjad, it's not lacking in nuance.
Yeah.
What you have to do is to stay with one idea.
Yeah.
Often in our writing, in our academic writing, we have several ideas and we work through them simultaneously, parallelly, or intertextually as we write. But that's not the way you write so that I'm saying that there is a need out there for public history.
Right.
And conversation about how do we do public history? What does it mean to be doing public history? Because often when I'm talking to my colleagues, they think I'm dumbing it down. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. This is not dumbing it down.
That's the standard assumption that so-called, you know, popular history is.
Oh, you see, you're calling it popular history.
Well, I mean, I think that's what other people call it, right? They call it kind of popular history. Is not.
Pop history is what William Dalrymple does.
Yeah, I mean, well, we won't go into Dalrymple's a different. Well, that's a different set of arguments which we don't want to go into right now. You know, that's it's a different kind of beast, so to speak.
Okay, yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think there is this kind of element of the assumption of it, and you know, earlier in the week I was having this conversation with Norman Naqvi, and we were talking about how this has a lot to do with the sort of the ruptures that things like modernity have brought, and the way in which things like epistemology and the experience of being colonized has meant that we have ended up privileging certain, I guess, practices and modes of thinking, and we really do need to, like, basically decolonize it, right? And in some ways, I actually, I mean, the decolonization is something I'm obsessed with at the moment. I've just written a piece on how you decolonize the study of the Quran. And I see this actually as a process of decolonization, because it strikes me that decolonization has at least two steps. One is not just critiquing, you know, the so-called Western hegemonic narrative, but also the way in which certain other types of privileged narratives within our, you know, indigenous contexts.
Yes,
also,
absolutely.
And those have to be decolonized as well. So it's not just the external; it's also the internal colonization, which has to be dealt with.
And you know, like there is so much poetry, cultural stuff that nourishes our being. But when we are writing as historians, we have to set it all aside.
Yeah.
To be this omniscient narrators who are objective, who are divorced from their background completely.
Yeah.
It's Sajjad writing or Aparna writing. There shouldn't be any difference between that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the way. And then we are being scientific. And I. Okay.
Yeah.
The message is very clear, Sajjad.
Yeah.
It's very clear.
You know, actually, a colleague recently, sorry to cut you off, but a colleague recently even commented that because we can't have conferences at the moment, we should have Twitter conferences. And if you are confined to presenting your paper, say, in 10 tweets, then that really forces you to get to the point and not mess around.
I shall assault you with the tweet, and I shall.
And that kind of raises this whole point, and also it forces you to be comprehensible, because you've been and I've been to conferences where people give papers and you're thinking, what the hell is going on? I have no idea what's going on. There's the performative aspect, the kind of posturing aspect of the conference.
Absolutely. And I feel that we are becoming irrelevant. If that's what historical writing is about.
Yeah.
If it is for conferences, if it's for my peers, I'm way beyond that now.
Right.
I'm not going to tie myself or my scholarship down to that. But if it's not reaching out, if you're not impacting public debate, then the university as a space is also becoming irrelevant.
Right.
We can go on producing research, but then what? And here, I'm not talking the language of impact. You are in England, so you know this through RAF and everything. There's a whole impact paradigm.
Well, impact is also very difficult to measure when you're doing that sort of thing,
Yeah, so I'm not talking about impact here in that way, in the way we are sort of sometimes forced to account for ourselves, that we're not these lazy people who are just lazing around and doing nothing. No, I'm not talking about like that. But if we are not getting out and writing for the public, then who's writing?
Yeah.
There's a lot of uninformed writing happening there, a lot of propaganda out there. How do you cut through that mess?
Right.
So you need to write intelligent books, you need to write books that people can access, ideas that people can access, and persuade them. They can, that's what I tell students, that I'm not going to take away your belief. You can hold on to your belief. You can hold on to your crap. All I'll do is try and persuade you, give you some thinking tools.
Well, I mean, I think, I still have this old-fashioned idea that, I'm not trying to impart any knowledge or a way of thinking, but rather maybe help the students to question everything that they read and everything that I tell them. And if they do that, then that should be sufficient. And to think about how it is that they would go about assessing those sorts of narratives and questions. I think that would be much more useful.
Absolutely.
So, to sort of kind of bring this to a close, I guess, because I don't want to hold you too long. Has this, your current project, your next projects, has this basically changed the way you're doing those?
Absolutely.
Right. So what are you working on now? What are you working on now?
So it's
how
like
do you intend to disseminate it?
Yeah, the book has had a before and after effect for me.
Right.
And it's sort of, I realized the possibilities of my own writing. I was like, okay, footnote is going to be there because I can't write without a footnote, but there are clever ways of doing footnotes.
Yeah.
As you can see in this book, they just do it, but they do a neat job of that. So I just submitted a book called Waiting for Swaraj, Inner Lives of Indian Revolutionaries, to guess who? Cambridge University Press.
Right.
But here was the thing. I gave them the first 2 chapters and I asked them, would you publish this? Because this is not a Cambridge book.
Right.
It's not written in the way people write for Cambridge University.
Cambridge India series, yes.
Yes. So, if you are willing to be a little adventurous, because this book has got a narrative style, it's written very differently.
Yeah.
It's meant to engage even people outside of academia, but not dumbing down the material, but just writing simply. And I'm not going to give away the story in the first paragraph and explain, oh, this is the problematic and this is the thing. And, it's not going to happen like that. So if you are courageous enough, then take the book. Otherwise, tell me that then let's go ahead. Otherwise, let's not.
Okay.
So I was surprised because I think even the university presses are realizing that they don't sell.
Yeah.
They need people to read. Good books need to be read. So I was surprised that they went ahead with it. So, so and I was really proud of them.
Okay.
I was like, you guys you're willing to change, you're willing to do it differently because I guess you understand the politics of the time.
Right. Okay.
So that's done. And then I'm doing another one with LF on Bhagat Singh's trial.
Right.
On the revolutionaries' trials. So hopefully that will come out in a year's time again. So again, writing it differently, writing it in a more accessible manner. Good research, public can read good research.
Right.
Let's assume intelligent readers outside of academia.
That's true. But all of this basically keeps with your primary concern with violence, right?
Well, that's how it started.
Right.
You see, and then I realized that violence beyond a point is not enough of a lens.
Yeah.
How much will you say about it? What will you say about it?
Yeah.
And then with revolutionaries, I realized that they're not really concerned with violence. This whole violence, non-violence debate is Gandhi's problem.
Yeah.
Revolutionaries are not concerned with this. They're fine. They're so, they are not, it's only when they're attacked, they're told things, they'll say, okay, we don't care about violence in that way. That's when they will talk about it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they are not at unease with it.
Right.
So the thing with Gandhi and non-violence, what has happened is that the people who were bombing and all were left accounting for their violence.
Yeah.
But I think it's the reverse. It's the non-violence that requires accounting. Why the heck are you non-violent? You can be violent. Okay, anyway, I shouldn't be making those claims publicly, but yeah.
No,
that's the way the revolution
thought. That's actually a very interesting point. It's sometimes we focus on that because it's like the sort of thing that we don't want to deal with the wider issue. It's easier to focus on the violence as the element that it troubles us with this person, and not kind of a wider idea or vision even for the world. Yeah. Which it certainly seems to be in that.
And as I was saying to another set of another one of these talks, that we think about violence in a particular way, and that is that violence is episodic.
Right. Yeah.
It happens and then it ends.
Yeah.
Or violence is physical.
Yeah.
Or we think of violence as something anomalous.
Yeah.
As a rupture that ruptures the usual peace.
Yeah.
So this is the UN style language.
Right.
The academics are not UN peacekeeping force.
Yeah.
So our job is to analyze and analyze deeply.
Yeah.
So actually violence is structural, violence is epistemological,
and
violence is a state of being.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a
so and that's the way lots of people experience their lives.
Yeah, it's the kind of the state of exception is the norm, so to speak.
Exactly. So, and when do we get talking about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
When do we get to analyze it? So I think that's where I was coming to, and once I got through that point, I stopped talking about violence when it came to revolutionaries.
Right.
So both the books have very little element of violence, like talking about violence.
Okay.
I was like, okay, that's boring. We don't need to talk about violence. I don't need to account for it.
Well, I mean, I look forward to it, and when that is out, we will do another one of these.
We can continue doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that I'm taking this on, on behalf of the institute, but at some point I might start doing this on my own. In fact,
it's actually fun.
I was even thinking of doing some of them in Urdu or Hindi or whatever, just because I thought we could reach a much larger audience.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking maybe actually for those I might even do them in summer. If you're interested in doing this again, but in Hindi, as well, my Hindi, which is heavily Urduized or Persianized. That could be quite interesting.
Yeah, sure.
And
it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you for this.
Thank you, Sajjad.
I will be uploading the video on YouTube. I've started doing that with the previous ones. So if people will still have an opportunity later. This will be still on the Exeter Institute Instagram for at least 24 hours. So people can still watch it. But there'll be a permanent record once I've recorded it and put it up.
And all this I've said I shouldn't have said will be on the
Oh, but once you've said it, you've said it. It's out there. It's you no longer have control.
See, that's the thing.
Yeah, no, that's good. But I mean, I think, and the conversations will continue. I look forward to future conversations. So, thank you to everyone who has tuned in.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining in.
And thank you to Aparna once again. Just a quick plug for the next one I'm doing tomorrow. I'm going to be in conversation with Neha Vermani, who is in Delhi at the moment, about her research on the food cultures of the Mughal elites. Which should also be fun. So it'll be the same time, 4 o'clock British Standard Time, 8:30 in India. So please join me if you can for that tomorrow. So thank you once again, Aparna, and hope to see you in better times.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.